Hey there, crewmates, Gabe from Nexus Core here with another One Piece card game video. Today we are going to be going over the last installment of my Paramount War set review, going over all of the black cards that have been revealed. So let me know down below in the comments if you want me to do a total set wrap-up about how I feel about everything, because I'm just going to be focusing on black in this final video. But without further ado, let's get started with our new black leader, Smoker. I'm going to be skipping over both Garp and Zed just because I went over them in their respective red and purple videos, and I don't really feel the need to repeat myself when you can go back and support the channel by watching my other videos. So, Smoker's effect is a usual mono black leader, so he's a life 5, power 5, type is Navy. His effect is Dawn 1 during the main phase. Give up to one of your opponent's characters, cost -1. Then, if there is a character with a cost of 0, this leader gains an additional plus 1,000 power. So, basically, you can... It's a 6k because it needs the Dawn. You can give something cost -1 to proc some abilities to get something under the threshold of killing, and you can also potentially make it a 7,000, which against anything that isn't Whitebeard will force out some considerable protection from your opponent, which is definitely not bad at all for a single Dawn. I think the fact that this is effectively an ability you will be using every single turn is really what makes it quite good. I really don't know what is better between this and Sengoku, not Sengoku, Sakazuki. I think that they'll have, unlike something like from set 1 Zoro and Luffy, where they had pretty much the same build, I think there's going to be a bit of difference because Smoker can reduce the cost but can't kill, whereas Sakazuki can kill but can't reduce the cost. So I think those differences will actually provide some noticeable differences in their respective builds. But I think this is a fine effect, especially for something you can and will use every turn, unlike the other extremes where you might not use the effect that often. So on to our first character, we have Isuka. So another shout out to the Ace Light novel like we had with Masked Deuce back in red. She is a 3/4 counter 1000 Navy type. The effect is Dawn 1 once per turn. When this character battles and KOs an opponent's character, you can set it as active. So it's kind of like a Diet Basil Hawkins. I'm kind of mixed on it because... Well, first off, while she is cost 3, having only 4,000 power means it's going to be a lot easier to block her, because she needs to KO, not just battle to begin with. So if your opponent just counters from their hand, then you're not going to get her effect. But she does have the counter, whereas Hawkins doesn't. But also, this isn't really an ability that Black cares about. This has nothing to do with cost reduction and effect knocking out. This is just combat tricks, which if Black gets another build later on that involves that, this might be a tech in a non-Navy deck, but I just don't think you're going to need this when you can prioritize things that reduce cost, kill things of low cost, or draw. So I don't think this is a necessary card, but I mean, I don't want to say it doesn't have potential, I just don't think the build we have is the build for it. Next, we have Onigumo, who's cost 5, power 6, counter 1, type Navy. If there is a character with a cost of 0, this character gains Banish. I think it's decent. I think, actually, based on this effect and another card that has been revealed earlier, I think Sakazuki is going to be pure knocking out, whereas Smoker will have a lot of things about reducing something to 0, getting some effects off of it, and then knocking out, which I think is kind of interesting about that slight subtlety. I don't know if this is worth it because Banish isn't bad, and it's good on a 6k, of course, but at the same time, this doesn't, kind of similar to, whatever her name is, Isuka, this doesn't reduce cost, it doesn't KO thing of a reduced cost. It cares about reduced cost, so it's at least closer to what the deck is already doing, but I think based on how many hoops black needs to jump through, which is reducing the cost enough, because sometimes it will take 1 or 2 cards, and then the card that KOs. Black really needs everything to fill a very specific purpose, and while the banish isn't bad by any means, I just think that black really does need a lot more cards honing in on the KO by cost to really warrant running Onigumo. Next, we have our first SR being Kuzan. Cost 4, power 5, no counter. On play, draw a card. On attack, give up to one of your opponent's characters -4 cost during this turn. Absolutely fantastic. A conditionless draw 1 is always great, especially in black because so many of the cards discard to knock out, and you do not want to be going that far behind an advantage. Giving cost -4 is a pretty significant chunk. If you are playing the Sakazuki leader, you can turn... This makes everything that is cost 4 or less hittable by Sakazuki. There will be other cards to make other things even further down. If you have 2 Kuzans, you could make 8-drop Kid destroyable by Sakazuki leader's effect, which is kind of nutty. So, fantastic card. Absolutely fantastic. Next we have Kamail, who is a 1-cost vanilla 1/3/1 navy. Nothing more to say. We have another Kobe as the rare. Cost 3, power 4, counter 1, type navy. On play, you may trash 1 card from your hand, KO to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. So, I think this is quite good. I think it's a bit of an upgrade over the Kobe from the start deck. Yes, it costs 2 more because the other Kobe was only a 1 cost, but the fact that this can hit things of cost 3 or less is pretty decent. The Kuzan we just saw plus Kobe Kuzan means Kobe can hit anything that originally costed 7 or less, which is quite solid. So I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I think this is pretty decent. I do think it might see some play. Next, we have our next SR being Sakazuki. Cost 6, power 7, no counter. On play, trash a card from your hand, KO to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. So, Kuzan plus this means you can hit everything besides 10-cost Kaido and the other 10-cost card we're going to see soon in the entire game. That's great. That's fantastic. Just being able to, on attack -4, on play, kill that is so good. Those cards work so well together. I think from what we are already seeing, because there are plenty of cards that can kill on play, we'll probably see the Smoker leader over the Sakazuki leader, because we don't really need to run that many, because we don't need to use the leader's kill effect if we already have plenty of things that kill on play. Though conversely, if we have a leader that can kill, we might not need to play things that kill on play, which is what I was mentioning earlier with these deviations in the build. But that's a tangent. Sakazuki is a great card. Just also having the stat line of 6/7 is really good. This can almost natively hit 8-cost Kid if it wasn't going to kill it on play anyway. So I love it. Next we have Django. Shout out to this freaking weirdo. Cost 2, power 3, counter 1, type navy. If you have a full body, this cannot be KO'd. Unless full body is amazing, this does not matter at all. Who cares? It's a 3k base. You're not going to actively go out to KO it anyways. No. Next we have Strawberry. Shout out to the long-headed boy. Cost 4, power 5. Type navy. On attack, if there's a character with a cost of 0, so another thing that cares about that, your opponents cannot block this with anything of cost 5 or less during this battle. What I think is actually very interesting about that is it's another card that we've seen that has a pseudo Shanks or Diable Jambe, but you could theoretically reduce the 5-cost blocker to the cost 0, and that means it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where you're probably going to want to kill a blocker anyways, so you reduce it, and then you attack while it's there because it's not going to be blocking, and then you get rid of it when you feel like it. So this is decent. Again, general hesitation of how many cards that don't actively reduce cost or actively kill we're going to want to be running, so that's a thing to note, but I think this is pretty decent for that reason. Next, we have another Smoker, cost 3, power 4, counter 1, type Navy. This character cannot be KO'd by effects. On attack, if there is a character with a cost of 0, it gets 2k. The fact that it isn't doesn't require Dawn is pretty decent, so it's effectively a free 6k attacker, which is pretty neat. So, again, depends on how many of these, if you have a character... if your opponent has a character with a cost of 0, cards we're going to want to run over things that can kill. But the fact that it also has the native protection in a way is pretty decent. Next we have another Sengoku, who is cost 2, power 3, counter 2, so already good. Type Navy, the effect is Dawn 1 on attack. Give up to one of your opponent's characters, cost -2. If you're running it, it's for the 2000 counter. The effect isn't bad, but there are so many other things that already fill that niche that you don't need to spend a counter 2000 on, and that don't require Dawn 1. Like, you have the start deck Tashigi, which, while you're not getting an attack, you can use it the turn you play it instead of having to wait for an attack. So, the fact that it has the shield is good, but I'm not wowed by this effect. We have Sentomaru. I like the small addition of the Pacifistas in the background. Cost is 2, power 3, counter 1. Trigger is play this card. It's a vanilla trigger that you'd see in a start deck skip. Then we have another Tashigi. Cost 3, power 5, type Navy. Dawn 1 on attack. Give up to one of your opponent's characters, -3 during this turn. This is pretty decent. It's quote-unquote better than that Sengoku we just saw. She doesn't have the counter, which the Sengoku does, but the fact that she has the stats that warrant wanting to an attack and decreases even more is definitely worth it. I can see this seeing some play. -3 is pretty decent, but at the same time, we already have the Kuzan, which for the same power gets us a draw, doesn't require the Dawn, and gives -4 instead of 3. So, unless you want to run both Tashigi and Kuzan, there isn't much of a reason to run her IMO. Next we have a uncommon for Tsuru. I like the small addition of her Devil Fruit being used in the background. Cost 1, 0 power, counter 2, so already decent start. On play, give up to one of your opponent's characters, cost -2. I'd probably run this over Sengoku just because it's on play and not on attack, but at the same time, it's a 2000 counter, so you'd probably just use that instead. So, 2000 counter means it's already decent enough to consider for that alone. Next is Doberman, which is just a vanilla 2/4/1, nothing much to say about that. We have Don Quixote Rocinante, who is a 2/2 counter 1, type Navy and Don Quixote Pirates. Effect is blocker. So it's the usual suspect we've seen with Higurashi and Black Maria for a 2-costed blocker, so pretty decent. It's another blocker, so it's already pretty good. Next is Jaguar D. Sol, vanilla, so 4/6 counter 1, type Giant and Navy. Not much to say. It is it's just a vanilla. Next we have Hina, a rare. Cost is 5, power 6, counter 1, type Navy. Effect is she is a blocker, and on block, select up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less. That character cannot attack during this turn. This is very, very good. So the fact that she is a blocker with 6k means in most cases your opponent will probably need to add Dawn to hit her, which is already good. But the fact that she could also just stun a card is just incredible if your opponent has a decently set up board. This is a great card. This is a genuinely fantastic card. Next, we have the full body for our Django, who is a 2/3/1 Navy. On attack, if you have a Django, this character gets 3000. Hey, I was right. You can ignore both of them. Next is Belmare. This was cute. They including her is so cute. But her cost is 1 power 1, counter 1. During the main phase, you can rest this character, give an opponent's character -1 cost. Then you can give your leader or character +1. So it's kind of like the Smoker leader as a character. I'm not so sure about this one, just because it's not bad, but if your opponent thinks it's good, she is so easy to remove, anything kills her, really. So you're very likely to only use this effect once, but it's also not even that meaningful. A reduction of -1 doesn't really matter in a lot of cases when you have things like Kuzan that are on attack -4, and plus 1,000 power, again, not going to hurt, but not an amazing increase, which it shouldn't be because she costs 1, but not much to say. I'm not really impressed by her. So we have another Helmeppo, though, who is cost 3, power 3, counter 1, Navy type. His effect is on attack, give up to one of your opponent's characters, -2. Then if they have a cost 0, it gets 2,000 power, trigger, you can play it. I think that's pretty neat. The fact that, because it's on attack, you do the cost reduction first. So theoretically, the first could proc the second if your opponent has a character with a cost of 2, let's say. You don't need to give it any Dawn. You could go 3 to lead. Reduce that character's cost from 2 to 0, and because your opponent has a 0, it will be a 5k, which is pretty decent. Again, though, it depends on how many things we want your opponent to have cost 0, because what you have to consider is every card that has an effect that happens when your opponent has a cost of 0, you have to weigh it to a thing that can kill something of cost 0, or even higher, because Kobe can hit 3 or less, Sakazuki can hit 5 or less. That's part of why I'm so hesitant on a lot of cards like this. Next, we have a third SR. I think this is why purple only got the 1, because somebody needed to suffer. This was black's first set, so they did deserve the extra. Borsellino is our SR, cost 4, power 5, counter 1, already good. Type Navy, during the opponent's turn, this gets plus 1,000 and cannot be KO'd by effects and blocker. So this is very, very good. It's funny in the mirror match because reducing its cost doesn't matter because it can't be KO'd by effects. It can't be KO'd by Jet Pistol, which hits 6 exactly. The fact that it has 6,000 power means it's another hard blocker, so you can really get some good defense out of this. So this is another very, very solid card. Next, we have Monkey D. Garp, who is cost 2, power 3, counter 2, type Navy, Dawn 2, when attacking, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 0. It has counter 2,000, which is decent. The fact that it does necessitate Dawn 2 means it will be a 5k, so it can still at least hit things, and there's plenty of ways to get to 0, so this is one of the few cards with a counter of 2 that you might actually want to play down, but again, mostly probably they're just for the counter 2,000. And wrapping it, I think, up for characters is Yamakaji, who's a vanilla 3/5/1, nothing else to say. So first off, for the events, we have Ice Age, which is cost 1. Main, give up to one of your opponent's characters, cost -5 during this turn, and trigger, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. Not bad. I think there are so many ways of reducing cost that you largely don't need this unless you really want to use it early. Theoretically, if you're going second, turn 2, pay 1 Dawn Ice Age, and then use Sakazuki, because by that point, anything that's reduced by 5 is killable. But I think there's enough things that can fill this niche that you don't need it. For example, you have the start deck Helmeppo, which while it only reduces by either 2 or 3, I believe, it does at least give you a body on board that you could use for other purposes instead of just going away. So I don't think this is bad, I'm just not so sure about it. We also have Yasakani Sacred Jewel, cost 1. Counter, you may trash 1 card from your hand, select up to one of your opponent's characters, or one of your characters. The selected character cannot be KO'd during this battle. And trigger, KO up to one of your opponent's stages with a cost of 3 or less. I'm more interested by that trigger effect. Yes, it's a trigger, so it's very unlikely to come up, but we are seeing more stages now, and because of that, we're seeing cards that interact with stages. So more than anything, I'm interested in what this represents for the game going forward as opposed to that trigger itself. It's a decent trigger. I think every event so far costs 3 or less. Onigashima's 3, Thousand Sunny is 1 or 2, I believe, but it also doesn't see play. All of the ones, I believe, from this set are cost 1. Moby Dick is 2, but Impel Down is 1, New Kama Land is 1, Wano Country is 1. So every trigger, or every stage is hittable by this trigger. The counter effect isn't bad. Because you just use it on a blocker, basically, and no matter who the blocker is, it will stay there. The problem is that it does require you to trash one card, and black does not have an amazing amount of draw cards as we've seen. I think thus far the only pure black draw card we've seen is Kuzan. Part of why I think the Zed deck going forward is good is because it has access to purple cards like Queen, but black does not draw a lot, and every card that KOs something, like Sakazuki, the 6 cost and the leader, or the new Kobe, you have to trash a card from hand anyways. So there's already so many ways that you are going to be trashing cards that I think this counter is just too overcosted that it's just not going to work out that well. So sorry that the trigger is probably never going to go off because it's attached to a card that probably won't see play, but it does at least bode for an interesting idea of what to think about going forward. Next is Meteor Volcano, a rare event. Cost is 2. Main, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 1 or less. Trigger, draw 2, trash 1. Not in love with it, personally. I think what's nice about it is it doesn't necessitate a discard like everything else does. But because it's an event and not, say, a body like Sakazuki, it is still a 1-for-1, and it only targets cost of 1 or less. Like, the 3 cost Kobe, for 1 extra cost, you get a body on board, and yes, you lose a card from hand, but you keep Kobe and you lose the discard, you're going to lose the Volcano either way, and it only hits 1 or less, whereas Kobe can hit 3. So being able to hit something threatening with this is unlikely. It's great in the early game. If your opponent goes first and they play a 1 cost, you can hit something, but I just don't love how restricted it is, so I'm not sure how much play it will see because of that. However, the trigger is very good. Draw 2, trash 1 is always good, so that's definitely worth mentioning. And lastly, we have the secret rare, which black I think definitely deserves. That is the new color in the game with Kuzan, our second 10 cost card, who is power 10,000. Type is former Navy. His effect is, during your turn, give all of your opponent's characters cost -5, and on play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 0. I think this is a quite powerful card. It being a 10 cost means you gotta give pause about and think about your Dawn curve. Black, as we've seen, so many of their good cards are in that 4 to 5 range. Kuzan is a 4, Borsalino's a 4, the Hina's a 5, the Sakazuki's a 6. There are so many heavily costed cards so that your curve is already on that middle area anyways, that at 10 cost, you're probably not going to want to run a whole lot more than 2 because if you open up too many, you're not doing anything, and if you open up like 3 of these things, you're just going to brick. But I do not want to undermine this effect is so good. Giving all of your opponent's characters a -5 during your turn is so good. It means most things are going to be hittable by most things. Pairing this with the Zed leader means you can hit 8 cost Kid because Kuzan reduces it from 8 to 3, and then Zed hits 3 or less. So this plus Zed means anything of cost 8 or lower can be killed by the effect, which is so good. And another thing that's important to note is because continuous effects always take precedent over activated or automatically triggered abilities, as well because it goes top down. Your turn effect takes precedent over the on play, meaning that if your opponent has a character with a cost of 5 or less, you play Kuzan, Kuzan's continuous effect will automatically trigger, reducing it to a cost 0. Then the on play will happen to kill something with a cost of 0, which is really another reason why this card is a 10 cost, because it has such good continuous effect that any black deck so far will want to use, but it also kills something for free on play most likely. So this is very, very good. If you somehow get 2 of these on board, everything is going to die at any point, which I think is kind of hysterical. But this really, really is worthy of that secret rare 10 cost title. This is a fantastic card that you're going to want to see in all the black decks we've encountered so far. And that is going to wrap it up for all of the cards we have not gone over yet. So I think Navy is in actually a pretty interesting position. This is unlike the previous builds where colors where some builds got some cards here or there. We have not seen a second build. Everything black is all navy, which I think makes sense because this is black's first main set support after being released in the starter deck. So I think black is in a pretty decent place. It has quite a solid amount of cards. I think the thing that would hold it back is it already has this kind of high arched curve because, as I said, you have 4 cost, 6 cost, 5 cost cards you're probably going to be running. Even if you ran the cards that had effects that would trigger when your opponent had a 0 less, like Onigumo and Strawberry. These are another 4 or 5 cost. There are so many cards of decent to high cost to play that you do have a bit of a rough early game, in my experience, besides just playing blockers like Rocinante or the start deck Suru. So that's definitely a thing that might be holding it back. Also, the other thing holding it back is that while there are plenty of ways of reducing cost and killing of low cost, because so many of the things that kill require a heavy investment like a discard or a Dawn -4 for the Z card, there are not many draw cards in it. So if it seems like a deck where if you wind up behind on resources, you will just stay behind, and you just kind of wind up relying on beating with things like Sakazuki, which can take you the distance, but I think those are the main things that the deck's main weaknesses and will need to be addressed in sets going forward to support black. But with all of that said, that is going to do it with my review of the black cards. Let me know what you think about them, what you like, what you're going to be wanting to do with your Navy deck. Please let me know what you think about set 2 as a whole. I'm very happy with the direction that this game is going, with so many interesting different play styles that all seem to have their own degree of viability. So I think this is a fantastic follow-up to what it was a fantastic first set for the game, and it really only makes me more excited to play this game. And yeah, I complained in some of the other colors, like I didn't care for the Ivankov deck. I don't care for the Wano deck that much, but just the degree to which Bandai is going in interesting directions and wanting to support those interesting directions instead of going, hey, what if we just made a deck with all 1-cost cards? Let's have like 3 cards and sure. They're actually trying to support all of these different things all across the spectrum, and they're going in all of these interesting directions from design philosophy, which I'm just so happy about, and I think this is such a fantastic game, and I'm just so excited to play it going forward, and I think this, as I said, is just a phenomenal set. So, again, I've rambled on a little bit too much. Let me know what you think about everything here. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.